Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's a pretty critical one. We're going to be peeling back the layers on the doctrine of multinational operations.
Hmm.
You know, looking at the whole complex architecture of alliances, partnerships, and maybe most importantly, those ad hoc coalitions that seem to underpin almost every major military and security goal these
Well,
days.
that's right. They're everywhere once you start looking.
Exactly. And we're digging into some key source materials here. We've got the RAND Corporation's big study, building military coalitions, lessons from the United States experience, and also that strategic essay, Allies and Partners are our strategic center of gravity.
Both really insightful reads.
Our goal really is to figure out the real motivations. Why do nations actually join up? Both the practical reasons and, the political ones.
And how do they manage the inherent messiness of it all? Working together isn't always smooth.
Definitely not. And then, crucially, what does all this doctrine tell us about what's happening right now? Specifically, that strategic competition playing out in the Indo-Pacific.
A very timely
Yeah.
connection.
So let's kick off with that foundational idea that keeps popping up in the sources. That essay, Allies and Partners are our strategic center of gravity, is pretty direct about it.
It really is. It argues these relationships are absolutely vital if you want to advance national security objectives.
It frames them not just as, something nice to have, but as the absolute core strength, the foundation the whole military effort rests on.
That's a powerful way to put it, a strategic center of gravity. It implies that's where an opponent would ideally strike to cause the most damage, and conversely where our own greatest strength lies if we nurture it.
Okay, so if they're that important, how do we nurture them? But maybe first we need to get the terms straight.
Definitely. We need that doctrinal clarity. The sources are careful to distinguish between three concepts people often mix up: allies, partners, and coalitions.
Right. Let's break those down. What's an ally, doctrinally speaking?
Okay, so an ally, according to the sources, is a nation that has a formal, long-lasting defense agreement with the United States. Think broad, long-term objectives.
Like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Exactly. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is the prime example, 28 nations bound by treaty. Or, the bilateral treaties the U.S. has with Japan, the Republic of Korea, the Philippines. These are deep, enduring commitments, generations long, really.
So the key is that formal treaty, guaranteed mutual defense.
That's the core of it. Now, partnerships are a bit different. They're usually structured around narrower goals, maybe more temporary ones.
But the essay says they're no less vital.
Precisely. They might be less permanent than an alliance, but still crucial. They're built on common interests, a shared purpose for a specific issue, but they lack that broad, immediate treaty promise.
So maybe focus just on counterterrorism or like regional stability in one particular spot.
Lead kind of thing, yes. Now, the third one, coalitions. The RAND report, aligning with Joint Publication 316, defines this very specifically. A coalition is fundamentally an ad hoc military intervention, temporary, built for a specific purpose. It involves the United States and at least one other country besides the host nation where the intervention is happening, working together for a common action.
So it's the least permanent of the three arrangements.
That's right. Formed for the job, then potentially dissolved.
And the RAND researchers, they were pretty specific about what counted as an intervention for their study, weren't they? It wasn't just any small deployment.
Oh, absolutely. That's a crucial detail for understanding their data. For them to include an event, it had to be a formal military intervention meeting a certain threshold.
Which was?
A deployment hitting over 100 person years of military personnel outside their home country.
Okay, 100-person years, that sounds a bit academic. What does that actually mean on the ground?
Well, it means a substantial commitment. It ensures they're not just looking at routine training or small exercises. 100 person years could be, say, 100 troops deployed for a whole year.
Or maybe a larger number for a shorter time.
Exactly. Like 1,200 troops for a month. That hits the threshold. And they had equivalent measures for naval or air power, too, looking for things like an aircraft carrier strike group or a full air wing deployed.
So significant, costly, visible commitments.
That was the point. Isolating major military undertakings.
Okay, let's unpack the why, the motivations. Why does the United States, with all its power, often choose this route? Building a coalition seems, well, potentially slower and more complicated than just going it alone.
Yeah.
What's the strategic thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question. The initial analysis from that RAND report suggests it boils down to two main things: practical necessity and political legitimacy.
Let's start with the practical side. The report calls it burden sharing. That's hypothesis H1 for the academics, but really it's just basic math and logistics, right?
Pretty much. Burden sharing is the most straightforward benefit. Coalitions mean the United States doesn't have to commit as much personnel, equipment, and importantly, money.
And the savings can be big.
Huge. The report mentions the U.S. Government Accountability Office finding that coalition use effectively halved the cost of U.S. peacekeeping activities.
Halved. That's a massive incentive right there, especially with tight budgets.
It really is. And it's not just about troops on the ground. Partners might provide specialized support like medical units, logistics help, or even just funding. It spreads the load.
So the bigger the expected cost or the longer the operation, the more attractive burden sharing becomes.
Exactly. If you're looking at a massive long-term stabilization mission, you almost have to share the burden. It's just too much for one nation.
But doesn't that sharing come with trade-offs? You mentioned complexity,
Yeah.
coordinating different systems, different rules of engagement. Surely that slows things down.
And that's the core tension, isn't it? You accept some operational friction, some complexity to gain strategic benefits. And maybe the biggest strategic benefit, especially since the Cold War ended, is international legitimacy.
Legitimacy. The report suggests this political driver is actually paramount now. More so than burden sharing, even.
In many cases, yes. It's been a major factor driving the trend towards coalitions post-Cold War.
Why is legitimacy so much more important now?
Well, think about it. The Cold War had this single, unifying existential threat. That could sometimes justify unilateral action in the eyes of many. But post-Cold War conflicts often involve internal state issues, regional disputes, things where international law and global opinion are much more sensitive.
So having a broad coalition, especially one with maybe United Nations backing, provides political cover.
Absolutely. It's a political shield that acting alone just doesn't offer. And that legitimacy pays practical dividends too. It can make it easier to get basing rights, overflight permissions from neighbors, things you need logistically.
That makes sense. It smooths the political path, which in turn smooths the operational path sometimes.
Precisely. And that's why the sources argue legitimacy keeps coalitions relevant even when the threat feels severe. Winning the political argument is often just as vital as winning the fight itself.
Okay, but speaking of severe threats, the next factor, degree of threat, seems to highlight a real conflict in U.S. thinking. The idea that if things are really bad and urgent, the instinct is to act fast and alone.
That tension is definitely there, and the source material tackles it head-on. The quantitative analysis did find some evidence suggesting the U.S. preferred unilateral action when the immediate threat was high, when core national security felt directly endangered.
If they could handle it alone.
That's the huge caveat. If the United States could resource the operation unilaterally, there seemed to be a slight negative relationship initially between how severe the threat was and the likelihood of forming a coalition.
But history doesn't always bear that out, does it? The biggest conflicts.
Right. The caveats are critical. If the operational demands, just the sheer scale of the fighting, the number of troops, the logistics needed, were too massive for the U.S. to handle alone, then coalition support was sought regardless of how severe or immediate the threat felt.
Like the World Wars.
The World Wars are the classic examples. The demands were so overwhelming, relying on partners wasn't a choice, it was a necessity.
So it's a balance between the need for speed versus the need for scale.
That's a great way to put it. Speed might favor going alone, but scale almost always necessitates a coalition.
And the data from the RAND report really emphasized something else too, didn't it? About the type of conflict.
It did. It found a really striking connection. There was a 63.7% increase in the likelihood of forming a coalition when what they called the kinetic indicator was present.
Meaning when actual fighting was involved.
Exactly. When force was actually being deployed and used, the U.S. was much more likely to build a coalition. And confirming that political trend we discussed, they also found a 44.8% increase in coalition likelihood after the Cold War ended.
Reinforcing that idea of legitimacy and burden sharing becoming more central in the modern era.
Definitely solidifies it.
Okay, so that covers the U.S. perspective. Let's flip this around. Why do other countries choose to join these U.S.-led coalitions? They must have their own reasons, right? It's not just altruism.
Absolutely not. They have their own strategic calculus. The RAND report digs into the key variables here. And the first, probably the most powerful predictor, is having a close relationship with the United States already.
So existing ties matter most. Military, political, economic.
Overwhelmingly, the data show that having a pre-existing alliance dramatically increased the odds of a country joining a coalition as a major player.
Why is that? Just wanting to keep the U.S. happy.
That's often a big part of it, maintaining the relationship, protecting economic benefits that come from it, or maybe banking political goodwill with the U.S. for when they need something down the road. Joining is like an investment in the relationship itself.
Makes sense. What about geography? Does being close to the trouble spot make a difference?
Huge difference. That's the second factor, home region. Countries are much more likely to join if the intervention is happening in their own backyard.
Because the threat feels more immediate.
Exactly. They see a direct nearby security risk. The example given is Jordan and Saudi Arabia joining the global coalition against Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. For Jordan, sharing that border with Iraq, the threat was right there.
And Saudi Arabia, too, with its long border.
Right. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria felt like an existential threat to their own stability. So their participation was driven by very direct, urgent national interests.
Okay, that's a clear case of shared interests driving participation. But the sources also say it's not always about shared interests, right? Sometimes countries join for their own unique reasons.
This is a really critical point for understanding how coalitions actually function or sometimes don't function smoothly. The report calls it pursuing unique objectives. Meaning, while you need some baseline shared interests like dealing with a common threat, countries often use coalition participation to achieve their own, sometimes narrower, national goals, goals that might not be directly related to the main fight.
Like what kind of goals?
Could be seeking international status, gaining domestic political points back home, maybe just getting their military some operational experience, or testing new equipment.
Can we talk more about that status-seeking motive? It sounds like a very political reason to send troops into harm's way.
It's highly political, but it happens. For smaller nations or countries trying to boost their global reputation, even sending a small, symbolic contingent to a major coalition can pay off diplomatically.
Any examples?
The analysis mentions countries like Bangladesh and Nepal using their significant contributions to United Nations peacekeeping operations to raise their international profile, to show they're responsible global players.
So it's about image and influence.
To a large degree, yes. Another example is post-World War II. Australia and other British Commonwealth nations joined the occupation force in Japan, partly to assert their international standing as independent powers. They traded a relatively small military contribution for a potentially significant boost in status and relevance.
But you can immediately see the friction they could cause, right? If a country's main goal is just showing the flag for status, how willing are they to take real risks or absorb casualties compared to a country facing a direct threat?
That's exactly the challenge. It introduces potential seams in the coalition's cohesion and willingness to act decisively. And that's something we definitely need to keep in mind when we talk about the Indo-Pacific later.
Okay, one last factor for partners joining. International government organizations, like the United Nations or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Do you need their stamp of approval to get countries on board?
You don't strictly need it, but it helps. A lot. The
Right.
studies confirm that having sponsorship from an international government organization significantly boosts the willingness of countries to contribute.
Why? Just the legitimacy factor again?
Primarily, yes. It provides that global stamp of approval, making it easier for governments to justify participation to their own populations.
And does it matter if the organization is, say, regional? Like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization intervening outside Europe?
Interestingly, the sources suggest not always. An organization established for one region can still lend its legitimacy elsewhere. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, for example, has led operations far outside Europe, leveraging its political structures and established credibility to attract a diverse range of partners.
That's a key point because, as we'll get to, the U.S. doesn't really have that kind of overarching multilateral security organization in the Pacific.
A major difference in the strategic landscape there.
All right, so let's assume the political will is there, the motivations align enough, and the coalition actually forms. How do you make it work on the ground? We're shifting from strategy to mechanics now, and it sounds like it all boils down to interoperability.
Interoperability is absolutely king in the execution phase. Joint Publication 316, that strategic essay we mentioned, they all hammer this point home. It's about merging different languages, cultures, equipment, rules of engagement. It's a massive challenge.
And it's not just about the tech, right?
Yeah.
The sources talk about the human dimension.
Critically important. Beyond compatible radios or ammunition, interoperability requires trust, respect, and a shared understanding between the people involved.
How do you know that?
Through practice. Combined exercises are key. They test shared doctrine, shared operating concepts, and let forces actually learn to work together seamlessly. Joint Publication 316 even lays out tenets for multinational operations.
Such as?
Things like respect, building rapport, really knowing your partner's capabilities and limitations, patience, that's a big one, staying focused on the mission, team building, and fostering mutual trust and confidence.
And ignoring those human factors.
Leads to a lack of unity of effort, the publication warns, which can directly cause mission failure. Building rapport is emphasized. Commanders need to make real, personal connections. If there's a language barrier, focus on the person, not just the interpreter. Make the effort to bridge those cultural gaps.
I can only imagine the specific challenges. Technical, non-material.
Oh, they're huge. On the technical side, the problems are immediate if equipment isn't compatible. Different radio frequencies are a classic headache. Different logistics needs, even different types of ammunition for the same weapon system.
Like slightly different artillery shells.
Exactly. If one partner uses one type of 155mm shell and another uses a slightly different one, suddenly your whole supply chain is struggling to deliver two different things that do basically the same job. It creates instant friction.
And the non-material side. Culture, language.
Joint Publication 316 really stresses this. Different national norms, different organizational cultures, language barriers, religious practices, even just how people communicate internally. It all impacts how well forces can work together. Commanders need to be culturally aware, try to accommodate different customs and holidays where possible.
Does having worked together before help? Does past experience smooth things over?
Generally, yes. Experience matters. If forces have trained together or fought together before, it provides a huge advantage. The Gulf War in the early 90s is often cited.
Why that conflict?
Because many of the partners involved had decades of shared history through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and other exercises. That prior experience really helped them overcome the challenges posed by the sheer size and diversity of that coalition.
But experience isn't always good. Can it hinder things?
It can. The analysis warns that sometimes past practice can actually stifle innovation. If partners get too comfortable with how we've always done it, they might fail to adapt when the situation changes, when a new threat requires new thinking.
Where have we seen that happen?
There were observations like that among some North Atlantic Treaty Organization partners in Afghanistan. Processes that worked well for Cold War scenarios or even the Balkans sometimes got in the way of adapting effectively to the counterinsurgency fight there.
Which makes ongoing relevant training absolutely essential.
Couldn't be more critical. And the source material points out that current operations, like the enhanced forward presence rotations in Europe, are deliberately being used as training opportunities.
How so?
Because they're in a relatively lower threat environment, it gives forces the time and space to really hone those complex interoperability skills needed for high-intensity conventional warfare. And it's not just troop training. We see things like the German army using it to practice large-scale rail movements with their national railway company, Deutsche Bahn. That's interoperability on a national industrial scale.
Okay, let's shift to command, control, and coordination. How do you actually manage all these different national forces working together? Joint Publication 316 outlines 3 basic command structures.
That's right. And they offer very different levels of control and unity of effort. The first is the integrated structure.
That sounds like the ideal.
It often is. It's typical of mature alliances like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It generally provides the greatest degree of unified control because, at the alliance level, national objectives are often already aligned with the broader multinational goals. National commanders usually delegate significant authority to the multinational commander.
Okay, what's the next option?
The lead nation structure. This is more common in those ad hoc coalitions we talked about. One nation, often the United States, takes the lead. Its headquarters drives the planning and execution.
How much control does a lead nation have?
It really varies. It depends entirely on the specific command relationships negotiated between the participating countries for that specific mission. Contributing nations usually keep more direct control over their forces than they would in an integrated structure.
And the third option?
The third is the parallel structure. And this one, well, the doctrine is pretty clear it should be avoided if possible.
What's that?
Because there's no single overall force commander. Each national contingent essentially operates under its own command, and they try to coordinate their actions through liaison officers and coordination centers.
That sounds Potentially chaotic.
It offers the least control and the lowest probability of achieving true unity of effort. Imagine trying to synchronize a complex attack across forces from 3 different nations, each having to check back with their separate national command chains first. Delays are almost guaranteed.
So why would anyone choose a parallel structure if it's so problematic?
Usually, politics. If key partners are just unwilling to place their forces under any foreign command, maybe due to domestic political reasons or deep disagreements on rules of engagement, parallel command might be the only way to get them to participate at all. But operationally, it's a headache.
And trying to make any of these structures work relies heavily on the liaison network.
Liaisons are the glue. They're absolutely vital. They act as conduits for information, they help build trust, and they give commanders insight into the capabilities and, importantly, the national restrictions, the caveats that each partner brings.
You mean rules limiting what their forces can do?
Exactly. Things like restrictions on crossing borders, engaging certain types of targets, or operating at night. Liaisons help the commander understand and navigate those. Teams like the U.S. Army's Digital Liaison Detachments are specifically designed for this, bridging communication gaps and building that essential trust.
Okay, moving to the absolute backbone of any military operation, logistics support. Joint Publication 316 spends a lot of time on multinational logistics. What are the key challenges there?
Logistics is arguably where interoperability hits its hardest walls. The core functions are the basics: supply, maintenance, medical support, joint health services, and managing contracts. The big question in a multinational setting is always, who provides what?
How do they decide that?
They focus on concepts like common user logistics and host nation support.
Common user logistics, meaning?
That certain essential supplies or services, think fuel, water, maybe transportation, are provided centrally by one designated entity. This could be the lead nation, or maybe a nation with specific expertise, a role specialist nation.
So instead of 20 countries setting up 20 fuel depots.
Exactly. One entity handles it for everyone. It dramatically simplifies things for the contributing nations.
And host nation support. That sounds like relying on the country where the operation is happening.
Precisely. And ideally, this is all arranged before the operation starts through formal agreements. These define what the host nation will provide, maybe access to ports, airfields, local labor, food, water. During the Gulf War, for instance, support from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait was critical, and these bilateral host nation support agreements can often become the foundation for wider multinational logistics deals.
But the publication flags health services as being particularly tricky in a multinational context. Why are they so sensitive?
It boils down to national responsibility. Ultimately, each nation is responsible for the medical care of its own personnel. This makes it really difficult to fully centralize or rationalize medical services.
Because standards differ.
Standards differ, documentation differs, medical ethics can differ slightly. The document specifically highlights the exchange of blood and blood products as being extremely sensitive due to varying national testing protocols and safety regulations.
So you can't just pool all the medical resources easily.
Not easily. A lead nation can't just assume its medical standards apply to everyone or that every partner's blood supply meets its requirements. Medical planning has to be incredibly meticulous, often remaining somewhat decentralized to respect those national responsibilities.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating, I think. We can take all these lessons, why coalitions form, how they're supposed to work, and apply them to what many see as the biggest security challenge today, the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. The dynamics there bring all these doctrinal points into sharp focus.
The strategic picture painted in the Indo-Pacific Posture March 2024 document is pretty stark. It identifies 3 major adversarial regimes and notes they're increasingly working together.
That's right. The key state threats identified are the People's Republic of China, Russia, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And crucially, the document stresses they aren't operating in isolation. You see growing alignment. The no-limits friendship declared between China and Russia, North Korea supplying munitions to Russia for its war in Ukraine. There's a clear pattern of cooperation among them.
But the document singles out one threat as being unique in its potential to disrupt the global order.
Unquestionably, that's the People's Republic of China. The report describes it as the only country with the capability, the capacity, and the intent to fundamentally overturn the existing international order.
And the concern about Taiwan is prominent.
Very. It states that all the signs suggest the People's Liberation Army is working towards meeting President Xi Jinping's goal of being ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. But it's bigger than just Taiwan. It's about achieving regional dominance.
The military buildup is key evidence.
A huge part of it. The report notes China's nuclear arsenal has more than doubled since just 2020. And look at their navy. The rapid expansion, especially with advanced cruisers and destroyers, signals a clear ambition to project power well beyond their immediate shores.
And how do Russia and North Korea fit into this regional threat picture?
Russia continues to modernize its Pacific fleet. They're adding new submarines, both ballistic missile and cruise missile types, plus modern surface ships. And significantly, they've deployed the Sarmat strategic missile system.
What's the concern with Sarmat?
It's designed to give them the reach to potentially strike U.S. installations right across the Pacific, even including Alaska and the U.S. West Coast. It changes the strategic calculus.
And North Korea.
The Democratic People's Republic of Korea is laser-focused on its strategic weapons, developing tactical nuclear weapons, testing new ways to deliver them from trains, submarines, silos. Their recent drills simulating tactical nuclear strikes were clearly provocative and designed to raise tensions.
So, facing this complex, interconnected threat landscape, how is the U.S. approaching coalition building in the Pacific? You mentioned it's different from Europe.
Completely different dynamic. Yes, the United States Indo-Pacific Command has those strong ironclad treaty alliances. Australia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, those are the bedrock.
But no equivalent to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Right. There's no single overarching multilateral security alliance covering the whole region like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization does in Europe. Historically, many nations in the region have preferred looser arrangements, partly to avoid antagonizing the People's Republic of China.
So the U.S. strategy has to adapt.
It's driven by necessity. Instead of relying on one big structure, the focus is on building collective capacity through a network of relationships, strengthening bilateral ties, creating smaller groupings, and linking them together into a flexible, resilient deterrent posture.
What are the key strategic initiatives driving this? The first one mentioned is about force posture.
Yes, the distributed force posture. This is a direct response to the threat of missile attacks on large fixed bases. The idea is to shift forces away from a few vulnerable hubs towards a more dispersed, flexible presence, especially west of the international date line.
Making them harder to target.
Harder to target, more resilient, more responsive, and importantly, easier to operate alongside allies and partners who might offer access to smaller, more numerous locations. If your forces are spread out, they're more survivable and can be sustained better with partner help.
And the second big push is on advanced capabilities and information sharing, trying to solve those technical interoperability problems we discussed.
That's exactly it. To maintain an edge, there's an urgent need to get advanced capabilities into the field and ensure they can work together across allied forces.
Like the Guam Defense System.
Yes, that's a key example. It aims to integrate Army, Navy, and Air Force missile defense systems into a unified shield for Guam. Another critical piece is accelerating the Joint Fires Network.
What does that do?
It's about integrated command and control for targeting, allowing different units, potentially from different allied nations, to share targeting data and coordinate strikes seamlessly across the entire battle space.
And for sharing information more broadly.
That's where the United States Indo-Pacific Command Mission Network comes in. This is designed as a secure, modern, zero-trust environment specifically for sharing intelligence and a common operating picture rapidly with allies and partners.
Trying to overcome those old barriers where different security levels or incompatible systems prevented real-time sharing.
Precisely. It's the technical backbone needed to make a networked coalition actually function effectively in a crisis.
Beyond the tech and posture, the strategy relies on deepening specific relationships and agreements. The Australia-United States Security Partnership, AUKUS, seems central.
AUKUS is definitely a cornerstone. It has two main pillars. Pillar the first is focused on delivering conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, a massive boost to regional deterrence capability.
And pillar the second?
Pillar the second is about accelerating cooperation on a whole range of other advanced capabilities: hypersonics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber warfare. We're already seeing practical steps, like Australian sailors training on submarine maintenance in Guam. That's exactly the kind of interoperability building through training the doctrine calls for.
Then there's the United States-Japan Republic of Korea trilateral cooperation. That relationship seems to have really strengthened recently.
The documents describe it as the strongest it's ever been. The focus there is squarely on deterring North Korea. mainly through better intelligence sharing, coordinated missile defense, and just generally increasing the ability of the three countries' forces to operate together.
Signaling resolve seems key there, too.
Absolutely. Things like the first U.S. nuclear ballistic missile submarine visit to the Republic of Korea in decades that sends a very clear message about commitment and deterrence.
And these efforts to strengthen ties are extending into Southeast Asia as well, with the Philippines and Papua New Guinea.
Yes. In the Philippines, adding 4 new sites under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement in 2023 is significant. It gives the U.S. more rotational access for forces, which helps with the distributed posture, allows for more joint training to boost interoperability, and also positions assets better for humanitarian aid and disaster relief.
And there's investment going into those sites.
Over $100 million allocated for infrastructure upgrades. It signals a serious long-term commitment to that partnership and coalition readiness in the region.
And Papua New Guinea.
Signing a bilateral defense cooperation agreement there strengthens another link in the network. It helps improve the capabilities of the Papua New Guinea Defense Force and, again, enhances that concept of a distributed network posture across the wider region.
Okay, so we've journeyed from the basic definitions through the complex motivations for forming coalitions, looked at the nuts and bolts of making them work, and then applied all that to the really challenging environment in the Indo-Pacific. Let's try to wrap this deep dive up.
It's been quite a tour through the doctrine. I think the analysis really underscores that these relationships, alliances, partnerships, coalitions, they aren't just diplomatic niceties. They are truly indispensable tools of statecraft and military strategy.
And that RAND quantitative analysis was interesting. Coalitions aren't always more successful than acting alone.
Right. Success isn't guaranteed just because you have partners. However, they become absolutely crucial in 2 main scenarios. When international legitimacy is paramount, or perhaps more compellingly, when the sheer operational demands of the mission are just too big for the United States or any single nation to handle alone.
And that link between the past analysis and the future threats seems like the really critical takeaway for listeners today.
I think so, too. Historically, as we discussed, the U.S. might have leaned towards unilateral action if the threat felt severe and they felt they could manage the operational burden quickly on their own.
But looking ahead.
Looking at the potential scale of conflict with near-peer competitors like the People's Republic of China or Russia, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, the potential operational demands are just immense. We're talking vast distances, sophisticated adversaries, high attrition rates possibly. The scale is such that coalition support likely becomes a requirement born of pure necessity.
So it shifts from being a strategic choice to a fundamental need. The U.S. simply can't resource a major conflict alone anymore.
That's the strong implication. The nature of modern, large-scale conventional warfare almost dictates a coalition approach for survival and success, regardless of the initial preference.
Which, going back to our earlier discussion, makes the motivations of the partners joining that coalition incredibly important.
It really does. And that brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over, building directly on what the sources told us about partner motivations.
Okay.
We know that coalitions built on genuinely shared interests, where everyone perceives the threat in a similar, urgent way, tend to be more cohesive, communicate better, and stick together when things get tough.
Makes sense.
But the sources also clearly stated that partners often join for their own narrower objectives. Maybe it's boosting their international status. Maybe it's currying favor with the United States for later. Maybe it's domestic politics.
Right.
So the question to ponder is this. Given the enormous operational demands we might face in a future major conflict, how much vulnerability does it introduce if key partners in the coalition are there primarily to achieve their own unique goals rather than being driven by that same unified shared sense of existential threat?
How reliable are they when the costs rise if their core motivation isn't survival but status?
Exactly. That's a tension every commander and policymaker has to grapple with as they build and manage these complex alliances, like the ones taking shape right now in the Pacific, something to watch for as events unfold.
A really thought-provoking challenge to end on. That wraps up this deep dive.